Lord, you are doing something in all of our hearts. You brought us here today because you want us to encounter you in a way that satisfies us beyond overflowing. So today I invite you into my heart to do whatever you want to. I invite you into the heart of this church. And we as a church family would eat everything that you have for us. That we would be transformed today because we encountered you. We ask this in desperation and hunger. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, my guess is that some of you don't know this, but my name is David Brewer, and I'm the lead pastor here. And over the last few weeks, I have been with my family on sabbatical of receiving from God and refreshing my soul. So thank you for that time to really allow God to work in us. We spent time resting, learning, strengthening our souls, and I will say God has revealed a lot to me that even I'm still unpacking, but as I do, I will share what God tells me to share over the next few weeks. But before sabbatical, I wrote a sermon to share with you today. And guess what happened? God rewrote it. I was going to share this very familiar passage with you, and I was going to walk through it like I maybe normally would have. But over time of chewing on it, God had me read it from a few different perspectives, and it changed my whole message. So today you get a little bit of a raw sermon, if that's all right with you. If it's not all right with you, deal with it. Come back next week, and who cares? Anyway, but we are in a familiar passage, and it's Mark chapter 6. It's so familiar, in fact, that some of you probably have heard even me preach about it. But it's very familiar because it's so important. In fact, this is a story of a miracle that is repeated in every single one of the Gospels. Did you know that there are only two miracles that are included in every single one of the Gospels? And the first one, and the most important one, is the resurrection of Jesus. I mean, kind of an important one, right? And the second one is this story, the feeding of the 5,000. This is a common story. You're familiar with it. But I think that because it is so important to all of the gospel writers, it probably should be extra important to you and I. That we should probably spend more and more time chewing on this and revisiting this familiar story. So, in case you're unfamiliar, here's the basic summary of the story. Jesus feeds 5,000 families off of one kid's Happy Meal. All right, so that's the whole story. That's all you need to know. Jesus gets one little bit of food, 5 loaves, 2 fish, and he feeds 5,000 families. But there's so much more to this story. Sometimes when I've read this story, I've read it from the perspective of what was it like to be that kid who was the only one prepared to spend the whole day hearing from God. Like he's the one who prepared a meal and planned it out. And then some disciples who he's never met comes along and says, "Hey, can we have your food?" get your own, man. Like, I planned this out. Why didn't you prepare? I don't know what it was like for that kid. It doesn't say in the text. But when I read it, sometimes I think about it from his perspective and thinking, well, what could God do with the little bit that I bring? Even if I think it's not enough to make a big difference, in the hands of Jesus, it can change everything. But other times I think about it from the perspective of the crowd. I don't know what Jesus is all about, but I've heard some cool things. And I show up in the middle of nowhere just because someone told me, hey, Jesus is something special. And I show up and I don't know what I'm getting, but then Jesus fills me, satisfies not just my soul by preaching for 6 to 9 hours, but also filling my physical needs as well. That I get to experience a miracle and enjoy an extravagant feast from Jesus. So sometimes when I preach or when I look at this, I look at it from that kid's perspective. Others, I come at it from the crowd, but what about the other group? The disciples. What was it like to be a disciple experiencing this event in real time? So in a moment, I'm going to read through Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 44. So if you're not there, turn there. But as I read, I want you to imagine what it was like to be a disciple in the middle of this story. To help you get in that mindset, let me tell you what was going on in your history just in the chapter before. So starting in chapter 6 at the beginning, let me tell you what happened. Jesus goes and he does ministry in his hometown, the place he grew up, and everybody that he loves, and you know what it's like going back home. Well, Jesus is basically run out of town. They laugh at him and think, you have nothing worth hearing. So the people that helped Jesus grow up, walked with him through life, the guys that were on his Jewish soccer team 2,000 years ago, they wouldn't listen to this life-changing, life-giving message he had. It was the second year of his ministry, his public ministry. And Jesus is rejected. The disciples are there with him, watching Jesus process this and experiencing this frustration. And right after that, Jesus then sends out the disciples on their very first mission trip. So they go out in pairs, and he sends them out, and they have this wild adventure. It's this intense experience of God moving in ways that they've only seen happen in Jesus. But now, when Jesus isn't there, they are now casting out the demons. They are healing people through their prayers, and God is moving in this wild way. Then, while they're gone, Jesus' cousin, a quirky preacher in the time named John the Baptist, he gets beheaded because his politician doesn't like his message, and instead of repenting, would rather just kill off the guy. And so this, Jesus' close cousin, is beheaded because of his ministry. Now, the disciples come back. They're excited, jacked up excited about their ministry, about seeing God move, and it's just a busy time. But it was this spiritual roller coaster of success, of failure, of Jesus, the Messiah, being rejected, and it was just an intense time of emotional, spiritual ups and downs. And so we read in verse 30, they come back, and it says this: the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. So they came back and they were giving this report of how their mission trip went. And honestly, when I read this, and I imagine what it was like for these disciples, if you've ever been on a mission trip, This is kind of my experience, but if you would, watch this video clip.
I'm super excited. It was really tough. It was fun. I enjoyed it. It was definitely a different ball game, but I had a blast, so thank you.
An MMA fighter who won, by the way, she won, explaining this was an adventure. This was a whole different ballgame, but I had fun. I wonder if that's how some of the disciples were feeling. I wonder if that's how some of you guys are feeling after the last few months. But when they came back to Jesus, Jesus noticed something that they didn't notice, maybe, but they had a need. And Jesus saw this need and addressed it. And Jesus said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. So ministry was so busy, even when they had come back to Jesus, that they were so busy, many were coming and going, that they didn't even have time to eat. Jesus recognized that the disciples had a need that me, as a disciple and follower of Jesus, have ignored in my own life far too long. Jesus recognized the need of his disciples to rest, to get away and stop. So he planned a cruise. He planned a cruise and then planned a camping trip to follow it. Jesus knows it's something that we would like to ignore, that caring for our own souls is not optional as followers of Jesus. I'm talking to myself. But caring for our own souls is not optional. In fact, it is obedience to Jesus. Because what tends to happen for us who are followers of Jesus is that as we follow Jesus, God works in us this deep compassion for other people. To see their needs and to go towards those needs and help them. When we see demons, we want to cast them out. When we see needs and sicknesses, we want to lay hands and pray. But compassion without rest leads to burnout. And Jesus wanted to guard them, and he had compassion on the needs of the disciples. And so he encouraged them. We're going to stop everything. And we're going to take care of your soul. Over the last few weeks, that's what I've been trying to do, is to stop and get alone with Jesus and let him minister to me. We'll talk again over the next few months about some of those things that God has shown me in that process, but as the disciples, this would have been a huge relief. Many of you know what I'm talking about just in the physical. If your boss comes in after working 7/12s and he says, "Hey, you've been working so hard, you need to take a day off. You need to take a week off." You'd feel that relief immediately. Well, in verse 32, this is how the disciples responded. And they went away. So they obeyed. They went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. But now many saw them going and recognized them. And they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So the disciples getting onto this boat, going in the Sea of Galilee to a desolate place. Their plan is to take a break, to rest. This crowd that shows up, that got there before The disciples is a huge crowd. Later in verse 44, we see that it was counted as 5,000 men. At the time, that's how they would count like family units and just keep it simple for them. So they'd estimated between 12 and 20,000 people show up on the side of this mountain, this grassy hill, right next to the Sea of Galilee. They heard that they were coming, they gathered, and this is an interesting little fact, that at the time, each one of the villages on the Sea of Galilee would have been somewhere between 250 to 700 people. So what had to happen to clear out that many villages, to gather together 20,000 people all in one place? I know what they did. Somebody got on Twitter, just sent it out, hey, Jesus is coming here, and they were good, right? Apparently, this mass of people would go from village to village, and people were wondering, what's going on? Why is everybody coming this way? Well, you heard that Jesus is coming. And they would drop everything, leave everything that they had, and power walked their way to beat Jesus. Jesus handled this surprise party with grace, obviously. But what did he do? When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. No joke. And he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Jesus handled this surprise party by having compassion on these people because he noticed, like any good shepherd would, that these sheep were hungry. They were hungry. And so Jesus sat them down. It says later in these verses that they sat them down on green grass and fed them. But when Jesus noticed this need and the compassion for this big crowd, what did he do? He taught them. He fed them spiritually. Obviously, later, we see that he also feeds them physically. But whatever the need is that you experience in life, the Good Shepherd provides in abundance. In fact, some theologians believe that this place that he was preaching was the same place that he preached the Beatitudes or the Sermon on the Mount. And so when they realized, oh, Jesus is coming, let's go back to the place where we encountered Jesus before. And when Jesus preached that really good Sermon on the Mount, one of the things that he preached was this: blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Like, this was a promise at the beginning of Jesus' ministry that not only applies to them, but it applies to us. And I wonder, what's the difference between how they approached this promise to how we approach this promise? They showed up and Jesus starts preaching. I don't know about you, but the Word of God made flesh, put on human flesh, and started preaching the Word of God. He's probably a pretty good preacher. I promise you he's better than me. But Jesus starts preaching, and he preaches for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4, 5, 6. The sun starts going down. And Jesus is still preaching. But then, the disciples notice there's a problem. Someone is getting hungry. The disciples are aware that someone out there, people are getting hungry. But you know what's interesting to me? The people were there voluntarily. And in a group of 5,000 people, 5,000 men, 5,000 families, don't you think that somebody had to get up and move and go and do whatever they needed to do? Do you think that they would sit there for that long if they had to and feel like, oh, I can't get up because somebody's going to care? What was keeping those people sitting there listening to Jesus for 6 to 9 hours of preaching? It was their hunger. Not their physical hunger, but their spiritual hunger for the words and the truth that Jesus was giving. And so when I wonder why the disciples thought it was necessary to come to Jesus, interrupt him, and say, hey, Jesus, it's late. There's no chance that Chick-fil-A is going to deliver way out here in the boonies. Why don't we just send everybody home, send them away so that they can go feed themselves? Because somebody's hungry. The people could leave at any time they wanted. They could have gotten food whenever they felt like it. But who couldn't? The disciples. These guys who were absolutely exhausted, who were going on a retreat and then get interrupted in the middle of it, and now they got to do ministry again? And they still haven't eaten. They were looking forward to this rest. And now it was interrupted by a surprise party. And then Jesus starts teaching, and he just keeps going and going. Come on, Jesus. Now, it doesn't say it in the text. I get this. I might be reading into it a little bit, but I wonder how that conversation went to say, hey, Bartholomew, you interrupt him. No, you interrupt him. I did it last time. All right, not it. Or maybe it was papyrus, rock, and sword. I don't know how they figured out who was the one to go do it, but this one disciple goes and he presents this need to Jesus, offers a solution. Send everybody away. Disciples and followers of Jesus, let me tell you that our default is to meet our needs through earthly solutions rather than rely on God. It totally makes sense for the disciples to offer this. I mean, really, who's going to feed 20,000 people? It's a legitimate need. We've been here forever. We're hungry. I'm hungry. They're hungry. But we do the same thing, especially when we get hungry. What if we just work harder, do more, try harder, be a good person? Maybe we send the problem away and it'll just go away. Maybe if I get far enough away into my job, I don't have to deal with the pain and the difficulties at home that I don't know what to do with. But here's the deal with earthly solutions. You get earthly results. Jesus is in the business of compassion. He's in the business of meeting needs. But sometimes the needs that Jesus is meeting are different than the needs that we think are out there. And other times, Jesus meets the needs that we see in a different way than we think he should. But let's keep reading and see how this plays out. Verse 35, and when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countrysides and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." Okay, for the sake of time, how about this? How about I explain this section next week? Yeah? This will be a whole different thing. But let's just run through it. Jesus says, you go give them something to eat. We don't have anything to give them. It's going to cost us 200 denarii to feed everybody. Well, what do you have? Let's go find out. So they go find out, and they find 5 loaves, 2 fishes, and they bring it to Jesus and said, "This is all we got." Jesus says, "Great." He breaks up. Well, first he gives thanks. Then he breaks up those fishes and loaves, hands it out to everybody. But let me just read the text. You can fill in the details next week, but here we go. But Jesus answered, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and fifties. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up into heaven and said a blessing, and broke the loaves, and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate of the loaves were 5,000 men. Here's what I want you to get. Jesus was not only meeting the needs of the crowd, but the disciples didn't know it in the moment, but Jesus was meeting their needs also. Think about it from their perspective. They had just spent 6 hours sitting on a hillside overlooking a lake, on cool green grass, and all they had to do was sit and listen to Jesus. Jesus had taken back the responsibility of ministering to people for a season so that the disciples could just sit and receive from him. Where they were hungry physically, Jesus was feeding their souls with something that was truly satisfying. And this one is a new blessing that I'm coming to grips with myself. But Jesus blessed the disciples by providing them with an opportunity to sit and be hungry long enough that they would do something about it. I think oftentimes we approach our relationship with God just long enough to take the edge off of the discomfort. But I'll tell you, something God is showing me is that the discomfort that we are feeling deep within ourselves, or maybe that we notice in others, it's one way that God uses to draw us to himself. The disciples could have just sat there and talked about it all day long. Man, I'm hungry. When are we going to eat? When's this going to be over? Doesn't he know what time it is? The Golden Corral is already packed solid. Come on, Jesus. Or they could talk about it amongst themselves. Here's what's wrong with Jesus. You know, if I were Jesus, I would have preached this long. Doesn't he know? But instead of that, thankfully, gratefully, the disciples went to Jesus. I believe that the discomfort that you feel in your soul, you could sit around and complain about it all day long. Or you can use it as an opportunity to draw you to Jesus and to ask questions. To get to know Jesus, the Good Shepherd, who will provide for whatever that need is. And I believe that the discomfort that we feel is an invitation to connect with him in a different way. But, warning, just be sensitive to this. That God's ultimate goal is not to relieve the discomfort that you feel, but it's to satisfy the need that is way deeper than your discomfort. Like I said, for the sake of time, we're going to skip ahead about the process of how Jesus uses maybe other people, maybe uses you to meet needs. But right now, we're just going to focus on this truth from verse 42. They all ate and were satisfied. When was the last time that you approached God and felt satisfied? When was the last time that you gathered together with other believers and seeking Jesus and left feeling full, deep within? So whatever it is that you have need of, whatever unhealed pain is lurking in your soul that you need a miracle for, whatever damage a demon has done to your heart, or whatever physical thing is just driving you nuts so you can't even listen to the spiritual stuff, Jesus meets that need in abundance. I love that when they were done with this meal, everybody ate and was satisfied. You know, there are some people that ate more than others. Can I get an amen? There's some people who needed more and they left satisfied. There's some people who weren't ready to eat a buffet, and maybe people that didn't even like fish. But they left satisfied. But after they left, it wasn't like Jesus had just enough, but rather there was left over how many baskets? 12 baskets. Here's what blesses my heart as a disciple. when I look and I see, oh, Jesus, we got interrupted in the middle of this retreat. Had a great thing planned, and now everybody's just here and getting in the way. I sure am hungry. When are we going to eat? And Jesus provides a meal that satisfies not just the 12 of them, but the 20,000 that were there. But at the end of it, every single one of those disciples had a doggy bag to bring to the rest of their retreat. So let me just fill you in a little bit of what happens next is Jesus knows that the disciples still need a break. But after the meal, after they've gotten the basket that they can take with them, he sends them on the boat and says, go to that other desolate place that we had planned. Just go over there. I'll meet you over. They go there, there's a rough sea, and Jesus walks on water out there to meet them. But see, here's the deal. Jesus stopped off at a drive-thru on his way to the retreat because he knew that his kids, his disciples, were going to be hungry, not just then, but also where they were going. And he provided for what they needed, when they needed it, how they needed it, but not the way they wanted it. But today, somebody in this room has been following Jesus closely. Maybe for a while. But you're hungry. It could be that you've been serving Jesus faithfully for so long, or had this really intense moment, season where God was using you to do miracles. But you might not have taken the time to eat. To you, I want you to memorize verse 42. They all ate and were satisfied. Hey, disciple, your need matters to Jesus. Maybe it's hour number 4 of Jesus ministering. He's working in your heart. But there's this hunger in you that is keeping you from hearing his voice clearly. That it's distracting you from really hearing what he has to say. To you, I want you to memorize verse 42. Then they all ate and were satisfied. And maybe you just showed up today like the crowd. You didn't know why you came, but you showed up. Maybe you were hoping to hear from God. You didn't know you'd have to listen to a apparently good-looking guy. Thanks, Sam. Talk about Jesus, but as I've been talking, you've been hearing God, and something about him is drawing you to him. If you want, you can memorize this too. But they all, including you, ate and were satisfied. Today, Jesus invites every single one of us, no matter how long we've walked with him or if we've just started, we are to sit, to rest, to eat of him, and be satisfied to overflowing. I'm going to ask Sam to come back up, and in this time, I want you to experience and to be honest with yourself and ask God, show me the hunger. that I keep trying to use other things to fill. And Jesus, I don't get it. I don't know what this will look like, but I trust you to satisfy me. So I'm going to ask that you would close your eyes. And if you are bold enough, maybe if you're hungry enough, ask God. God, it's late. We've been here a while. But I don't want to leave here hungry. Lord, would you feed my soul? As we worship, spend this time with Jesus, I want to invite you to receive prayer for anything and everything. The elders will be up here, and we want to pray with you about anything, but specifically, if there's someone who has yet to follow Jesus, and Jesus says, today's the day for you to be satisfied. We want to pray with you. But in this moment, be hungry. Eat and be satisfied.